Foreign policy will have an impact on this presidential election, but for reasons that may surprise you. Today's guest is former congressional leader Robert Wexler, an expert on European and Middle Eastern affairs and who believes American leadership remains critical to the world and to our own security here at home. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., a special election edition of 13th and Park.
We give you information, not a panic attack.
I mean, look what's going on. I mean, my God.
This was it. The kids were gonna die.
That time is gone forever.
This is the biggest story in America.
We weren't prepared for this.
Don't you want to speak truth to power?
Toughest thing I ever had to do.
Robert, this is your third appearance on 13th and Park. I want you to know you're the very first to achieve that pedestal. Does that make you feel honored, or what am I doing with my life?
It's like winning the Triple Crown. Greatest honor you could have.
Well, we'll see how you feel about it after this interview.
Okay.
This is number
Fair.
3. So let's go right into it. What is the importance of foreign policy in a presidential campaign, any presidential campaign, and even more specifically this one?
I think it's obviously extremely important. Does it define who will be the winner or the loser? Not necessarily when people have angst about the economy or affordable, prices, housing, food, things of that nature. That will likely drive, I think, voters one way or the other more than foreign policy. However, in this case, Harris and Trump, there are very different visions that are being presented to the American people. So I don't think it's per se about Ukraine or Gaza or even Afghanistan, as it is mostly about former President Trump saying, America first. To a degree, we need to look inward. And Vice President Harris saying something very different, that America has a big role to play in the world. We have to continue bolstering up NATO and engaging with Ukraine to contrast with Russia. And then there's an agreement on China, that China is a threat to the United States.
Right, that's common ground.
Yeah, that is common ground. And I think both sides, frankly, in that regard, need to ask some bigger questions with very specific concern regarding China in terms of, we have an enemy in Russia, in my opinion, and we're not likely to change Putin's behavior. We have an enemy in Iran. We have an enemy in North Korea. Are we, or is our policies, going to move China closer into that group and engage more closely with that group? Or do we give them hesitation? And I would hope that what we do is give them hesitation. We're not going to convert them to being allies of the United States. But I think that's the big 30,000 feet question with China. Will they just become part of the anti-American group, or will they play possibly a less troublesome role?
So there is a Pew Research poll that came out a couple months ago on foreign policy. The question was, what are your priorities in terms of foreign policy? And I was very surprised by what I saw at the top of the list and what I saw near the bottom of the list. Top of the list, 73% protect U.S. against terrorism. Illegal drugs coming into America. Weapons of mass destruction was number 3. Military strength, 4. The spread of another infectious disease, 5. Then you get down to Russia and China, and NATO is like 9, and supporting Ukraine, 10. So you have Russia, China, Gaza, Ukraine in the second 5, not even in the top 5. Does that surprise you?
No. My time in Congress demonstrated to me that people care about their everyday lives. They care most about the things that they perceive impact them most directly. It doesn't mean they don't care about number 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, but that's not an immediate threat.
Right.
But their safety at the mall, at the shopping center, at their church or synagogue or mosque, that they worry about. So I think it's very natural. It's normal. I wouldn't read too much into it in the sense that within that number 6, 7, 8, 9, you will have groups of people that care intensely about it.
Right.
So that is what you have to be careful of in terms of analyzing political impact, motivations on elections, where those communities of interest live and how they play out politically. What kind of noise do they make? What kind of trouble do they make? So it doesn't surprise me that the result is what you cite. I think it's consistent. People care about what's important in their lives every day. When they get in the car and drive their daughter or son to school, what helps them, what threatens them, that's what they care about.
President Zelensky coming back to Washington to appeal for more funding. Do you think that it's becoming a tougher sell for Americans and American policymakers to keep funding a war that may have no end in sight?
The short answer is yes, it's a tougher sell. I don't think the merits of the position of backing Ukraine is any less meritorious today than it was when the war started. In many respects, it's more meritorious because of the sacrifice that we know Ukrainians themselves are making. It is nothing short of miraculous what Ukraine has done in terms of fending off Russia. But what we need to understand, in my humble opinion, not just in Ukraine, but also with Israel, very different circumstances. But these are two allies that are on the front lines of a fight that, of course, directly impacts them, the Ukrainians and the Israelis, but it also impacts us. Whether Russia is victorious, whether Russia is in an aggressive fashion, impacts the United States and our interests directly. Likewise, whether Israel is able to defeat Hamas, defeat Hezbollah, and most importantly, whether we, the Western world, are able to defeat and contain Iran, directly impacts the United States. And both Israel and Ukraine are on the front line of these efforts. And the great news for America is in both instances, there are not American men and women on the ground fighting the fight.
Right.
It's Ukrainians, it's Israelis. So I think we need to be very mindful of that reality and not make a mistake of backing down or moving out too quickly or too early.
Jim Sciutto, this is obviously
it's a major attack. There's no question.
What you are seeing, what we are all seeing with our own eyes, is a major attack from Iran.
It's a major attack, Dana, and it's an escalation. It's an escalation of this war.
How concerned are you, Robert, that this escalation could lead not just to a regional war, but one that maybe goes beyond the region and has worldwide consequence?
Greatly concerned. You listed, a number of the actors, plus the Houthis, plus the Iran surrogates in Iraq and Syria. This is a battle, all of what we're talking about, against Iran. We should not fool ourselves to think, this aspect is Hamas, this aspect is Hezbollah. We need to know who Hezbollah is. They are an Iranian agent that effectively has taken over the country of Lebanon. This is not a battle between Israel and in the north of Israel and Lebanon. This is Israel and Hezbollah, in effect, Israel and Iran. Hezbollah not only threatens Israel, they have on their hands the blood of over 200 American military people decades ago. These are not allies of America. These are not people that under a different circumstance would act rationally towards us and our interests. So whether it's a victory for Vice President Harris or a victory for former President Trump, we're going to need to deal with Iran strongly and sternly and understand that they are the nucleus of the problem in the Middle East.
Is Lebanon just an enabler in this scenario?
I think they're a victim. They're a victim of Hezbollah. What I find most remarkable in talking to many of my Lebanese American friends, they are not only rooting to a certain degree for Israeli success, but they view it in their interest to rid their country, their home country, Lebanon, of this terrible Iranian influence. And it's a shame the Lebanese themselves can't do it. But in the context of Hezbollah, people need to understand October 7th happened. Hamas attacked Israel. On October 8th, Hezbollah attacked Israel. There was no provocation. There was no context for Hezbollah to attack Israel. Israel's not on Lebanese ground. They don't claim Lebanese land. Hezbollah is an agent of Iran. They are, in effect, the second layer of defense for Iran. Now, interestingly, the Iranian president said that Iran might be willing to put down its arms if Israel put down their arms. No one should trust what the Iranians say, but it should be tested. It should be tested to see what their intentions are. What it probably shows is the Iranians are getting nervous because the Israelis have had extraordinary success in terms of their conflict with Hezbollah. And Iran may be feeling that they're getting to a point where that second line of defense that they've long enjoyed with Hezbollah may be at the point of being sacrificed. So Netanyahu's going to be strong. He'll be resolute. But he also has the goal, which is consistent with being strong and resolute, of returning the 60,000 Israelis from the north who have been displaced from their homes. And likewise, there are tens of thousands of Lebanese, innocent Lebanese, who have been displaced. So if there can be a ceasefire based on Hezbollah moving back north of the Litani River, which is where they're supposed to be based on UN Security Council resolutions, then maybe you have the genesis of something to talk about.
You just referenced the United Nations. So President Biden made a dramatic presentation before the UN, and I think got very good marks on it, both domestically and abroad.
A diplomatic solution is still possible. In fact, it remains the only path to lasting security to allow the residents from both countries to return to their homes and the border safely.
How impactful could that be on a world stage like the United Nations? And is the UN, does it have any real future in terms of its involvement in ensuring world peace?
Well, the second part first. I think it has a future in ensuring world peace because there's no better alternative. If there was a better alternative, then maybe it would be different. But we don't have a better alternative. Now, it could be, or should be, that the UN possibly can be reformed, changed a bit, so that the institution will be more effective. Because a UN that essentially is designed in certain respects, particularly with respect to conflicts with Israel, where it's always us, the United States, issuing a veto, that's not necessarily helpful either. We should stand by our principles, no doubt. But better, if it were possible, to have a scenario where that wasn't the case, where there was more of a consensus about reasonable positions.
And how did you score the president's speech?
I thought the president's speech was good because he not only did what you said, which is he talked about the institution, but he talked about both historically and, most importantly, currently and in the future, America's role in the world. And he defined our role, particularly one now and going forward, as, in effect, not just being the protector of the past, but we are the protector of the rules of order that prevent a complete chaotic and unruly world. Now, that doesn't mean we're the policemen of the world. We're not. But I think it's worth reminding the world from the podium of the UN, and particularly with the President of the United States talking it, whether it's Democrat, Republican, whoever it is, that America, while we're not perfect, if you have to pick one country in the world to provide the type of leadership so that we don't go off the rails, we're still the best candidate, and we're going to be, and here's why. And that's what President Biden did. Now, if President Trump gets reelected, no doubt he'll do it with a different flair, and Vice President Harris would do the same. But I think it's very important for the President of the United States to show the world what American leadership stands for. And I think President Biden did that well. And I'm always reminded when I travel, when you're in other capitals of the world, where is the biggest line, or in fact, any line ever, in terms of people standing outside an embassy to get a visa? It's always the American embassy. You don't see lines outside of Chinese embassies or Iranian embassies. It's the American embassy, and the UK has the second biggest line usually.
There was a YouGov poll that came out very, very recently and had a very surprising number. It's fascinating. Kamala Harris, the Vice President Harris, is preferred nationally on foreign policy by roughly 53-47. Donald Trump is preferred on foreign policy 53-47 in his favor in the swing states of America, right? These swing states, which everyone, of course, is now, completely fixated on and set their clocks to. Does that surprise you? And what could Kamala Harris and what could Donald Trump conversely do between, now and the election to drive that home in better ways for their election prospects?
Adam, I have no way of explaining that. I really don't. I think it's very important for Vice President Harris to talk about the necessity of America not turning inward and talk about the fact, and it has nothing to do with Republican or Democrat. In fact, Republicans traditionally are the ones most often making this argument. But if I've learned one lesson in terms of dealing with international relations, is that when America withdraws, there is a gaping hole that is created. It doesn't mean we shouldn't ever withdraw, but we need to understand when we move out, there is a gap, there is a hole.
A vacuum.
A vacuum. And much more often than not, that vacuum is filled by interests that are not aligned with America. It doesn't mean spending, untold amounts of money or, God forbid, American soldiers being put in harm's way. But what it means is engaging with the world diplomatically, economically, in every which way, so as to maximize our influence and power. We're not perfect, but the world will be a better place for us, let alone all our allies, if we do that. My concern with respect to some in the Republican Party is this growing isolationist movement. And again, beyond partisanship, it almost never works out well for America when we are more isolated. And so I think if Vice President Harris makes that argument generally, then I think there'll be a positive response.
And Donald Trump, he's trying to project strength,
yes.
Obviously.
Yeah, he projects strength very well. I have to give it to him. He projects strength and confidence. That's a positive thing for America. However, when you combine that with a message of we're turning inward, if that's what you think the message is, then I think it's a contradiction. And that would be where I would make the argument, if I were leading the Democratic message, that an America turning inward is not ultimately good for America. Don't say we're doing this for our allies or for our friends. No, we're doing it for us. This is our self-interest. We're supporting Ukraine because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's the right thing for America. We support Israel and its conflicts because it's the right thing for America. We support who we do because it's in our interest. That's the political argument to make, it seems to me.
Well, Robert, as always, I appreciate your balanced perspective. Thanks again for having the nerve to come on the show 3 times. Where are you going to be on election night?
I will be in front of a television by myself. It's going to be like probably 3 nights. God knows. Right. And you got to stay up till 3, 4 in the morning, and we'll be probably counting every vote in North Carolina and Georgia and Pennsylvania, and like the rest of the world, I'll be holding my breath.
So will I.
Yes.
Take care.
Yeah. Thank you.